Finally, speaking of Josh McCoy, we have a special guest here today, and the person to best introduce them would probably be Mr. Josh McCoy. So I will hand it over to him to get that open.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Franz Mendonsa, a principal VFX artist at Bungie, formerly independent indie game developer, then worked for EA as a VFX artist, worked her way up the ranks, worked at Blizzard, Activision Blizzard on Overwatch 2, and now is at Bungie. And also is working on a set of AR murals in Sacramento. So there's all sorts of great stuff here. Enjoy.
All right, thank you, Josh. And thank you to what do you guys the leaders of the group, everybody who helped set this up. It's been you guys have been very helpful in getting this whole thing set up. So thanks a lot for that. Yeah, so I'm very sleep deprived, so forgive me if I make any mistakes today. And hope you all have a lot of fun with us. I'm just gonna start with going through a little bit of what I've done, what a VFX artist is, and then we'll go into the project that I think has been sent around that everybody has access to the Unity project. All right, awesome. Yeah, so my name is Franz Mendonsa. I'm currently at. I hope you take something away. And then prior to that, these were some of the things I did. Worked in the indie space, things on the right hand side. And then I was at EA for a good amount of time. And yeah, out of the two, I'd definitely take the indie space over the big companies. But the good thing is VFX art goes all across the games industry. So this is a little bit of the most recent launch title I worked on. So some of the work I did on it.
You like to tweak the lights?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. Cool. So let's get into the meat of it. Like, what is VFX? Like, does anybody want to take a stab at it? Like, what is VFX? What does a VFX artist do? Go ahead.
I mean, is it if it's different from 3D modeling, it's the parts of 3D animation that aren't related to modeling and more like particles and I don't know, I'm lying.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. Like, yeah, we do a lot of particle work and everything that's moving on screen. Yeah, go ahead.
Special effects related stuff.
Very much so. Yeah. So we call it visual effects, but like some industries, like film, calls it special effects and stuff like that. So yeah, you're doing a similar role here too. Somebody there have something to say? Cool. Yeah, and at its core, like it's that and a lot more. And usually people describe it as doing a bunch of explosions and lightning and beams and stuff of that. And I'll tell you a slight story. Like I grew up in the Middle East and had to fly back and forth to the US over the last 15 years. So if I told TSA or immigration that I was making explosions and stuff like that, I wouldn't be here right now. So we do a lot of waterfalls and butterflies flying around and making things serene. That also falls into the role of the VFX artist. And so, I'll send out a few links to what, a lot of videos of like what artists do and what is good VFX in games and stuff like that. But this is more on a more in the subjective end, um, as to what a VFX artist is. I've broken it down to these 4 points, and the first part is like visual gameplay. And what I mean by this is it's a lot of the role of the VFX artist to communicate game design in a visual manner to the player. So if you want to say like, I'm doing damage in this arc radius, like it would be on the VFX artist to help convey that message. Like you see that bolt of lightning fire thing at the top left? That looks like it does a lot of damage. And so as a designer, you'd be like, I want something that does a lot of damage. And that would be it. If you're like, I want something that does a small, like 1%, like you wouldn't make something that prominent on the screen. Um, I'm guessing if I show you something like this, be like, it communicates pretty quickly, like something's been screwed up on the guy's screen, they're hacked or something like that. And so it's a lot of times VFX artists work with designers on helping communicate the intended design. So the second one is to enhance the gameplay experience. And so what this part is like, and I'll go into a little bit more detail with some images later, but that part is more in the vein of, if you feel like, hey, we want to communicate this experience to the player, like we want to show them that, you've got an upgrade, or like, in a game where the weather changes, like rain is about to come or like leaves are about to fall. All those things really help enhance the experience. And usually this is more in a general sense. The role of the VFX artist is, to your point, anything that's not a character or an enemy or something that's rigged and animated. Anything else that's moving on the screen usually falls into the hands of the VFX department. And then communicating the intended emotion. This is like one of the first things when I speak to like the game designers is what emotion do you want the player to feel when this particular action happens? Like, do you want them to feel empowered? Do you want them to feel like scared? Do you want them to feel bliss? And with that, you start making decisions on like, shapes and color and motion and timing and stuff like that. And the last part is closing the communication gaps. Is the easiest way to explain this is like if you see a dash in any game where you go from point A to point B in a very short span of time, like you'll see a trail or something take them by. Like that's closing the communication gap. Is, we don't have budgets like film has, and like you got to have this thing running in real time. So there are a lot of hacks and tricks we do to make that happen. So yeah, visual gameplay. Like this is the game Hades, which I like a lot. And there's a lot of freaking information in this game happening right now, like with VFX. We would sometimes call this VFX vomit because you see so much happening. But like Hades dashing around, you see like those spills on him, like that thing's gonna explode, you see the ring around it, showing intent. That falls into the VFX department as well. And so it's all like that subconscious communication that's happening with the player is usually the space we live in. So this is also an example of you see, the foreshadow on the ground, and you can see the different intensity levels just based on what that. Go ahead.
And then I had like do like people have something that we can communicate someone else and like have it actually that like use it, but we don't come to kind of focus on
Yeah.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. Like, you'll try it out and they'll be like, well, I want you to feel so and so. And then you play test it and you realize like nobody feels that way about it, or people want to feel a whole different thing. And a lot of VFX is a lot of iteration. So you'll start off with, your best hunch. And like that's a lot of game development as well. Um, cool. So yeah, like here is like enhance the gameplay experience. So God of War and then Hellblade on the side. But the thing that over here, like say would fall on the VFX department is like you see his axe, like it lights up, it frosts up, and it's powerful now. And then it goes and it hits the target, and you see the bolt of lightning happening. You're like, all right, something there happened. Like if you were to remove the VFX in that scene, you wouldn't be sure from a gameplay perspective as to how much did I communicate to the player. Like you saw all the other actions happening, him throwing it. So that's usually a spot where VFX is falling. Similarly, like the game Hellblade on the side there, that's a screen effect that's being done there. Without going too deep into the game, that's an effect where like she thinks she's insane most of the game, and then suddenly she's like getting in line with her consciousness. And so she's doing it all in her facial animations and expressions that the animation team does. But that subtle distortion to a smooth screen like really helps sell the idea as well. There's a game I really like, Control, where just communicating emotion on the left side, things are moving slow, the lights are not flickering, she's gliding, she's powerful. On the right side, like the lights are flickering, she's like jumping around, like she's at a disadvantage in that scene. All based on just the visuals. So yeah, that's the and the last one is like closing the gaps, like over here, do a lot of speed lines, wish lines. The thing on the right hand side is from this game Infamous, where the guy's dashing, but now with that whole VFX, like you can see the distance he dashed, how powerful he is, where in the dash he is. So yeah, just a cool additional enhancement. So overall, who VFX artists work with? Usually most of the team. You get a lot of Slack text in this round usually. But yeah, we so very recently the industry has defined the role, and I still don't know how to actually define the role. But like most VFX artists come from all different backgrounds, like from engineering, graphic design, animation, so on. Yeah. And so this will go through a little bit in the workshop. And this is something to like help you guys when you're making your VFX and particle systems. These are just some helpful tips on to make things look a little to more in line, is like always try randomizing things. Adding motion on the screen at some like just throughout the game like always feels good. It's always like people feel like the game is active to players. Usually never have a linear curve, like put some easing on it. Like most things don't move around in a linear fashion. If you haven't read it, there's like Disney has the whole thing on the 12 principles of animation. We use that a lot in VFX. Not all of them all the time, but we use a good number of them. And this is something through trial and error notices, like if you think something looks good, like Unity has this really cool thing now with their particle systems where you can do simulation speed and just try upping the simulation speed a little bit and see how that feels. It feels pretty good because usually when you develop with you want people to focus on the thing you're working on at that moment. But when you actually play things, it's like, all right, that is just a subtle or a subconscious action that happened in the game, and you don't want it to be the focal point of people. And for most actions that you see players in a game, try and start a frame early, or if you're starting on frame, like move things out of frame later. So like if you're having like dust motes fly out when jumping on the ground, like instead of starting right from where the feet land, like start out a little beyond the feet. Yeah, and so then a few other things like show it to all your classmates and friends, get feedback as much as you can. Like usually a first attempt's not gonna be great. And this one is like, yeah, make sure, I think like Arthur did tell me you'll have seen the ways to just improve feel of your game. And so like, yeah, just make sure every point of feedback that you want to give the player has some form of some form of visual feedback that you're giving the player, be it like just a decal on the ground, if something pops up, could be something in the UI, but give them that feedback that things are happening in the game. Yeah, these are some of the expectations of a VFX artist. And today we'll just go on the very first one. But it varies from place to place. The smaller the studio you're in, sometimes the more of these things you do. Some bigger studios have a little bit of definition to their roles. But it's a lot of fun. Like you get to do a bit of the technical side, a bit of the art side, work with shaders, sometimes script. Yeah, and this is more the general like discipline. Like say for creating textures, like you could be using Photoshop or you could use like generative tools, you could use, Substance or sure, like there are a bunch of AI tools now that you can be using too. Yeah, let's get into it a little bit. I'll show you some things. This is not Unity, this is Unreal, but we're not working on Unreal today. But now like knowing what it is, you can see a little bit of the things that a VFX artist would do. So like that destruction of the building would be a VFX artist, or the fire and the embers going around would fall on the VFX artist.
So these explosions, did you model the trajectory of every brick, or did you do that with the physics system?
So that would be the physics system that would take care of it. Like, so here now, like for that explosion, the texture generation was done in the software for Houdini. And so that's a little complicated. That other purple explosion did the same thing, and it was all just a bunch of shader math that made it look very similar. I preferred the second approach. I do not like waiting for things to render. But yeah. So this is some of the stuff. Oh, okay. Boop, boop. So I'll send this out. These are just some like fun links to learn more about VFX if you guys are interested in it. I'll send it out to guys on Discord. But cool. You guys want to get into Unity? All right. Oh, any questions about what I spoke about there? All right.
Questions I have like.
Okay. Then we will get to them soon. I'll just go through the project a little bit over here. Yeah, so you should have the project at this base level. Thank you everyone who helped set it up. Arthur was the one who was corresponding with me to help set this up. Oh. Well, thank you, Arthur. I've added something very subtle already to this, which goes to like a little bit of the squash and stretch, is on the main character. I just actually let's go to the animator. I'm sorry, I haven't used Unity in some time, so forgive me. Yeah, so on the jump animation, I just added a little bit of squash and stretch to the main character to help give a little bit of motion to, hey, this is what's gonna. Uh, Oh yeah, another thing is usually a lot of times when you work with other people as an effects artist, a lot of what you hear is like, I wanted to feel like, ugh, or like, that's a lot of the direction you get from people, and it's on you to interpret that. So the really cool thing about it is if you give two people the same requests, you're gonna get very different VFX, and that's the fun about it. All right. So let's get into it. I added a few effects here. Is there's an effect I put on the running, so you can go ahead and turn that one on. We added a trail on the jump, and on the landing, we added something there. And then this is something that would fall into VFX sometimes is like camera shake and stuff like that. So like just to sell the the weight of the jump, like we add a little bit of camera shake to this thing. Uh and like if you got the project yesterday, a few things that I changed were I upped gravity. This was something I learned very early on is real world physics numbers don't really matter like sometimes. I tried playing with gravity at like 9.81 and it looked shit. And then like I called over this engineer and he's like, just put it at 1,000 and see how it feels. And it felt way better at 1,000. So mess with numbers when you're playing around with your VFX. But yeah, let's go and see just how these with these two particle systems and jump added. So now like, there's that trail when she takes off. There's a landing effect. And already like, you're starting to at least like my take is like this has a little bit of a Nintendo feel now. Like it adds on to like the cutesy happiness of the character that was modeled and animated. Um yeah, and every time they land, like there's just that subtle camera shake. There's a trail on them to help sell the like jumping nature of it and so on. Cool. Um so let's go into how I added the run VFX. So in the project, I created, and so today we won't be going over materials and shaders and stuff like that. We'll just be looking at default Unity materials. So I created these four textures, very basic. If you don't know how to do it, I'm sure somebody around you will help you get these very basic textures up and running. And on the materials, I just went and took the Unity's particles standard unlit. And I basically made it what's considered like alpha blend, where you basically take the alpha and the texture and read out the color value as well. And there's one of them that I made additive. I'm not going to go too much into color theory, but so yeah, let's look at the VFX. Sorry. So the running effect over here. So as you can see, like let's disable shape, size, and rotation. So just with the basic default values, like I said, start adding like a little bit of randomization. Like so, there's like randomization in size, randomization in speed, lifetime, and so on. And just with those changes, you'll start seeing a lot of like cool stuff happen. Randomization and rotation. So what were the ones? I think I had a color of a lifetime, I had the shape. Um, and then I think it was size over lifetime. So you see like my size over lifetime curve. So it looks very cartoony where it, like scales up and then scales down quickly. So very Looney Tunesy or like Nintendo-y kind of looking thing. And yeah, so those are the things I changed in it. So if you want to go ahead and create it from scratch on your end, the shape, it's just a very basic cone. Um, and yeah, we go ahead and do that. So that plays out to our running animation or running VFX over here. And then the landing VFX. So now it's the same smoke. Because that's a loop action. So it's the same smoke. And with this time, playing with different forces. So the shape now is a cone that's basically, oops, flattened out. You could even like flatten it more if you want. And that's this angle thing. So if you have it like the, yeah. Oh, I'm on the spikes, sorry. This is the smoke. Yeah, so the shape for the smoke is, oops. It's very flat. Like if I were to, all the smoke would go upwards, but you're gonna, and then yeah, back to, so this is kind of like just basically a resistance thing, limit velocity of a lifetime. So you turn it off and these things fly out. And so now you're telling it like accelerate and basically dampen 40% every frame. And so it gets really slow at the end. Then again, same thing with the size. So we have that. So the funky thing with these spikes is it's doing the same thing, different material and different texture. And so for this one, I have this thing called stretched billboard, which it basically aligns itself to the direction it is being, its velocity basically. And so if it was to be, you know, isolate, oh, so yeah, if you were to see it in a billboard form, are you guys familiar with the difference between billboarding and basically view along axis, view along things? All right, billboarding is actually a very, very simple concept where you actually have a sprite and in 3D space, it's always looking at the camera. So that's how we fake the smoke looking like smoke. In like 3D smoke, it's actually just a sprite, no matter what angle you look at it from. It is it's pointing at the camera. So yeah. So stretch billboard is where it goes in, it aligns to the velocity it's going in. And so if I were to give it more lifetime, you'd see it going, or like add some velocity to it. Start speed. So now you see it like more selling that point. All right. And the trail renderer we have on the character actually. This is a simple trail renderer. And on the material, it's that basic texture we saw. And you can play with these variables of like how long you want it to be on the character. It's width over time. So cool. All right, I'm going to go into one more phase with you guys and your indie projects or your you know that can just help you know push your game to the next level with VFX, and it's pretty simple. And so if you turn this VFX environment day on, it has a light in it, which I'm guessing you guys are familiar with lights. Um, but additionally, it has this thing called VFX Embers and VFX Wind. And I'll go through how I made those two, but like, so now you just have these embers around. It feels a lot more inviting. This is slow tuft of wind. She's just in a happy place, jumping around, waving her arms around. And you could even um like on the post process, I added a few things to, like, make it feel even more calming. Like you put a slight vignette to like help with the mood you want to sell in it. Um, and adds a bit of feel to it. So um with the embers over here, basically the heavy lifter is this thing called a shape. The shape thing where I make it a big box. Um, we have this thing, color of a lifetime, where it just goes from 0 alpha to 100% back down. And then we add like forces on it, which this is just think of putting acceleration in different. And so again, we go as randomization over here, goes from -5 to +5. And so each ember moves all over the place. And then these tufts of wind that you see, I'll put multiple of them. Basically, they're a particle again that are moving. And then you add this system called the trail system. And now each particle gets its own trail renderer to it. And that helps sell a little bit of a wind feel to it. Let's see. Cool. So that was and also things with particle systems that are a little bit helpful is like the embers. So if I start the game right now, we don't see any embers, you start seeing them being generated. Usually for a looping system, if you use the pre-warn thing in Unity, it basically goes mid simulation, it starts the game there. So you have your embers from the start going on. And so using the same principles of everything we've gone through here, we go the VFX nighttime thing, and I'll change the post process, just a simple thing. I'll change the vignette to be a little bit more ominous in red. And so these are the same embers, have them moving a lot faster. Like the wind tufts are moving faster. Like now it looks like she's a little bit more in an unfriendly environment. Like, so I just added these plumes of fire without any textures or anything. It's just using a basic gradient. But based on the motion, um, it gives, and like the light around, and things you could do is maybe add a little bit of flicker to the lights and so on. But if we look at the VFX fire, it's using all the same things where we use forces. Now we go in an intended direction. Use the size thing where we scale it up like the fire. And I think I use, yeah, color of a lifetime. So yeah, I know I went over this stuff pretty quick, but yeah, these are some ways where just with a few simple tricks, you can help enhance the mood and the feel of your game. Yeah, and hopefully that was helpful. All right. Any questions, anyone?
I know that there's a VFX rack system in Unity that
Yep.
is much scarier, more complex UI,
Uh,
but like for many purposes, you can just use the article, maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean the use of VFX graphs, I would say, is like if you're looking at it more from like I use a system like I don't use Unity too much anymore, but I use a system similar to that where if I want to start plugging like my game design systems to my VFX, then I'd start using VFX Graph because like it's kind of like a visual scripting system then. So, say I don't need to create a separate Ember system then. I'll just have one global system, and then based on variables that, a designer or an engineer can change wind speed, and then suddenly things would start changing with wind and so on. So that's where, you'd use a system similar to the VFX Graph system. For at a base level, wouldn't necessarily use it, yeah. You had a question, yeah.
How different is it in VFX for a 2D game like Cuphead or all?
A 2D game versus like say a 3D game?
Yeah.
So principles are all the same. Like, the big difference you'd use in like actually even like this game versus a different 3D game is the things where like you can really start having a lot of fun with VFX and be more authoritative of how it looks is when you have a fixed camera. And so that's the fun part with the 2D game or like, an orthographic or a top-down game is you always know the camera angle. Sometimes like a first person or a third person game, like, you can be seeing things from multiple different angles, and that makes it a little harder. Like that's mainly one of the big variances you take in. Another difference I can see is like when you're in a 2D game versus this would primarily be a first person game. Is in a first person game you got to be a lot more conscious of like how snappy you make things feel, because like things could be a lot more stroby and things like that in that in that game, and you don't know when it's going to hit the player. So you like we curate a lot of things in that sense where like we have a lot of settings to control that stuff, but overall principles are the same. Anyone else? On to the list, Josh.
So what role do design documents play in a VFX artist?
A huge role. Like, a designer works with a lot of people, and even if it's a small indie studio, like a designer, like say a team of even two people, like the person designing that thing, like they need to convince themselves and other people of the idea they're selling. And a design doc also really helps you like go at a little bit slower pace to like really think things out a little bit. The other thing in a bigger studio, what it really helps with is getting people all on the same page a lot quicker, rather than having conversations with people. Um, and yeah, and it's more like a place where like people can like I constantly go back to like yeah, like I constantly go back to the design docs that like our designers set up just to like I said earlier, like to understand the emotion they want to show, or how do they want it to feel, like what's the damage numbers, what are things of that, like that really helps. Yeah, still a really good art to still be able to write documents.
Yeah. Large language models don't do that well yet. Uh, do you, create style guides that you use with the other artists? Like, what role does like syncing and consistency across all the art in the gameplay
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll go back a few. Yeah. Is there a way to get out of the slideshow? Oh, there we go. Uh, so the reason like I like a game like Hades is like they basically had like 3 people on their art team, and all the VFX was done by one person. All the environment art was done by one person, and like animation was done by a slightly bigger team. And so it's sweet when that's the case, because then you don't need to create a style guide. Like you just do what you think is cool, you iterate around with it. Like I said earlier, like with you know, like you give 2 VFX artists like the same task, you're gonna get a different result. And so on bigger teams and like things, I face a lot of it. A bigger company is a lot of getting people aligned to the vision, um, of what the game is. And usually the way that happens is we have a bunch of images and concept art and stuff like that. But additionally, since VFX is very emotion based, like there's a lot of verbiage that we use as well to just be like, I want it to feel snappy. It's like it's monotone. We have and things like that. Like we use a lot of those terms to describe VFX in style guides as well. Hopefully that answered the question.
There's totally a lot to say there.
Go ahead, Adam.
Sketching or visual screen, like something that you already see kind of process.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, so you're saying like, what's my process? Do I go from like concepting something out and then like play it out in my head and then start building the VFX? Or do I just go get my hands dirty and start making the effect? Yeah, so it varies a lot. Like, so if it's like, say I'll give the example of say Overwatch is like and like a game that already existed, or like you have a style guide, you have things set. You're like, yeah, like, we'll start with a concept and like we know the steps to take to get something done. So that's more like there's a pipeline. But say you're doing something that you haven't tested out before or like haven't done in the game before. Like over there, you'd start more with getting your hands dirty and like seeing what is actually possible to do in the game, or in the engine, or and then once you have like the technical side figured out, and you're like, okay, this functions the way we want it to, then you'd move on to the next phase of like, all right, now let's get concept involved and things like that. So yeah. So in the game I'm currently working on, like concept art comes like maybe midway through the process. Go ahead, Josh.
I get a million questions all the time. So, Doomfist.
Doomfist, all right.
Doomfist hits the ground, pop, and then crackle,
Yeah.
crush, crunch
Uh-huh.
happens. So how do you work with the SFX artist, sound effects artist, to sync all that together and just make it pop?
Oh, wonderful question. Yeah. So I'm very glad you brought up the audio team and the sound effects artists. And um usually at most of the teams I worked on, they love VFX artists because we're the one team that actually usually thinks of them beforehand. um so now so this rarely happens where the pipeline is where the audio team works on it before the visual side works on it. Like there have been instances where I worked on where the audio team comes up with this really cool system that then they want us to build an effect system towards. But usually it's like we're happy with how things visually look. And then we bring in the audio team to like add the whole other element of the auditory senses. Uh, but things we work with them like the edge cases are really the fun part where we work with the audio team on, like Doomfist thing, like when it happens indoors or it happens against a wall, that reverb and like how the VFX reverbs off the wall, like, or when it happens outside, like those are the really fun parts of working with the audio team. But usually in terms of like when he does his ability and like from an audio and an effects perspective, we usually just trigger it at the same time. And yeah. Very cool questions, by the way. Go ahead, Josh.
All right. So what's the difference between a visual effects artist and a technical artist?
Yeah, great question. The reality is we don't know. Uh, every studio has a different description of a technical artist. Every studio has a different description of a VFX artist. And those are two roles that usually the person they hire dictates. Like, there are like some VFX artists are really good on the texturing, the animation side of it. There's some VFX artists are really good on the technical side and building, destructible systems or building like big scalable systems. So it all varies, by studio, by person running that department at that studio. In certain places like tech artists. So the one thing is tech artists would potentially cover more than VFX. So like they would cover like characters or like animations and rigging and stuff like that. And like if you get to bigger teams, like you'll have a specific rigging tech artist, you'll have a specific animation tech artist, you'll have a specific character modeling tech artist. And that end, you're more of like just building tools. The more fun tech art roles are, to me, like it's different for every person, but to me are the ones who get to work in the engine and build tools and systems in the engine. Like those are really fun tech art roles. But yeah, it varies very heavily from studio to studio though. And yeah, it's very nebulous sometimes. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, those are all the questions. Thanks for answering the presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's real estate. I got a little bit. So
Sure.
it's like contracts about the effects work. You want to take them around the workshop project. Or ask Franz questions about how like this stuff.
Yeah.
People do that now. We feel free to lead if you want to. And the other thing is that in 2 weeks, we're going to have a sort of VFX office hours. Or not something later, but if you want to like continue to work on VFX or show friends your own VFX or just idea to sit on the VFX in this project and then get feedback on it. That's a really good opportunity to do so. So yeah, we'll not see more, but make sure to think about it.
Oh.
Yeah,
Thanks. Yeah. And sorry, I'm like totally going back in time here, but the way to add a particle system is either you could go to game object effects, create a particle system, or if you have something, it's a component that you can add to it as well. Yeah, sorry, didn't go through that, but hopefully this was helpful. Thank you.